I believe we are live. We're streaming currently to Facebook, X, YouTube, maybe Rumble. Rumble, we're struggling a bit with that integration, but please do tune in at X, Facebook, and YouTube. If you do tune in at those platforms, you can get engaged with comments and chat and get involved in the discussion. We are here this evening. I'm David, by the way, and I help produce the show. I'm happy to be here with Jacques Boudreau, the leader of our Libertarian Party of Canada, and a very special guest tonight, Walter Block. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Walter. Please just introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you are, and why you're interested in this conversation.
Okay, I'm delighted to be with you guys. I was born in Brooklyn. I went to school with Bernie Sanders. We were on the track team together, and I taught at several schools in the U.S., Rutgers, Baruch College, one or two others. And then I came to work at the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, and that's where I am now. I'm in Vancouver, and I worked there from 1979 to 1991, whereupon I was fired for being too free enterprise, but what can you do? And since then, I've taught at Holy Cross in Massachusetts, Central Arkansas in Arkansas, and I've been at the Loyola University, New Orleans, for the past 25 years, and I'm a libertarian. I was converted to libertarianism by Ayn Rand, maybe 1962, and then I met Murray Rothbard in 1965, and I became an anarcho-capitalist, and I'm a dual citizen of the U.S. and Canada. I've been a member of the Libertarian Party in the U.S. and Canada as well for many years. My main claim to fame is two. One, I beat Hayek at chess. Of course, my way of beating people is I say, look over there, and I grab their queen. I'm kidding, of course. And the other is I shook the hand of Ludwig von Mises, and I never washed it. It's a little dirty, but if you shake my hand, you channel Mises. So those are my two claims to fame.
Thanks very much, Walter. Over to you, Jacques. Please carry on.
Okay, well, thank you, David. Walter, it's wonderful to have you. I think Walter, and I will add something that I think speaks to his character, and I'm getting this from possibly the last interview that he had with Tom Woods, or maybe the one before that. But Tom pointed out that Walter has authored hundreds of 400 or 500 and counting papers. And according to Tom, Walter is generous with offering co-authorship to his students, which I find, in my experience, it's not something that happens very often. And it's a good trait. So, but Walter is also eminent in the field. And I want to point out to everyone that we did not reach out to him. Again, people know the story well, but we are a small party with very limited staff. And Walter actually reached out to us approximately a year ago, and his email was only found maybe a couple months ago, and which initiated the invite. And so here we are tonight. So it's very gratifying that someone of Walter's status would reach out to us. So here we are. So Walter, welcome, and thank you very much for initiating this. So I wanted to discuss a couple of things. Maybe we'll move on to other things, but let me start off with one, and I'll tell you where I'm coming from. When I first ran for office in 2015, so this was a federal election, one of my opponents was running for the Communist Party of Canada. And after the debate, I met him in the parking lot, and I went up to him, not to pick a fight, but my curiosity was genuine. I asked him, why are you running for a party that espouses a philosophy that has been a repeated failure? And he gave me an answer that I was not expecting. I was expecting the old, well, the theory is fine. There's just people, the practice is terrible. No, that's not what he told me. He informed me that at the time of the breakup of the USSR, some polling company or whatever it was started to, and I forget which of the stand it was, but it was one of the republics. They went to the people, polled them, and said, how many of you, or would you be interested in moving to a free market philosophy? And something like 90% of the people said, yes, we want to. And they did this every year. 5 years down, he told me at that point that it was almost the reverse. I forget the exact numbers, but there was now a majority of people who wanted to go back to the old ways. And he said, aha, see, these people have tried both. They've tried the Soviet or the central planning. They've tried free market, and they want to go back to, because the old ways were better. Now, my take on this is that the dislocations that would happen over a relatively short period of time, if you go from central planning to free market, would be, in all likelihood, quite severe. And I can see a lot of people suffering as a result and wanting, indeed, to go back to what they had before. So, with this preamble, and you can comment on that, but with this preamble, my question is, if the Libertarian Party of Canada were to take control, or win the election, not take control, but win the election, and we, say, in terms of philosophy, wanted to implement Doge on steroids and, severely reduce the size of government, would we be better off to do this gradually in order to minimize dislocation? Or is it more like, ripping the Band-Aid off and get it all at once, even though it would likely mean severe dislocation? So that's my question.
Well, that's a very good question and a very good introduction to it. I would say rip the Band-Aid off. Press the button if there were a button to press, and we have miraculously full free enterprise. And I would predicate my answer on two grounds: one, ethics, morality, and the other, pragmatism or utilitarianism. Let me switch a little bit. Suppose we're in the U.S. in 1830, and there's slavery, and we now seize power, us libertarians, and we have the choice to allow 1/10 of all slaves to be freed for the next 10 years, or we press the button and all slaves are freed right then and there. Which button should we press, or what policy should we pursue? And my answer is, you got to press that button and free them all right then and there, even though there'll be dislocations. Because if you have the power to end slavery and you keep it for 9 years, well, you're a little complicit in slave owning. You're a bad guy, according to libertarianism. And that's a very extreme example. I'm not saying that Canada is equivalent to slavery, God forbid, but Canada, the present Canadian system, is guilty of not slavery, but interventionism. All of a sudden, I only see myself. Could you put it back so I could see the two of you again? That's much better. Thank you. I like to speak to people. I don't like to speak to myself that much. I think it's very clear in the case of slavery. It's not as clear in the case of Canada, but I think the same principles arise. If we had the power to reduce, and let's stipulate as libertarians that what Canada is now doing is not kosher, it's not virtuous, it's a massive violation of rights. And if we had the power to stop the massive violation of rights right now, And we didn't do it, and we left them on for 10 years and only reduced the severity of the dislocations by, say, 10% a year for 10 years, we would then be complicit in rights violations, and that's no way for a libertarian to be. So much for the deontology or the ethics of the situation. Now let's talk about pragmatism or utilitarianism for a bit. Now, your buddy in the parking lot, he said that they really tried free enterprise and they didn't like it. Can you imagine what kind of free enterprise they tried? It wasn't any kind of free enterprise that we ever heard of. I mean, the idea is just preposterous that I forget which country it was, Georgia or I don't know.
It was one of the stands, but I forget which one.
Whichever one it was, they didn't try free enterprise. Come on, give me a break. They wouldn't know free enterprise would hit them in the mouth or in the nose. So that's not a fair comparison. Now look, under slavery, there was massive dislocation when they got rid of slavery. I mean, the slaves, what should they do? And, should they work for their ex-slave owner? And, there were massive dislocations. Now, what's going on in the U.S. is I think Donald fired, 10% of the IRS. And a lot of other people in bureaucracies that shouldn't have been in existence in the first place were fired. And what are you going to do with them? Well, they can get other jobs producing something instead of ruining the economy. So yes, there will be mislocations, misallocations, mislocations, what have you. Whenever you change anything radically, it doesn't go perfectly smoothly. But the idea that we should somehow keep these bureaucrats going because it's hard for them to find jobs, I think is preposterous. Now, there's another pragmatic point of view, and that is that if we libertarians who now we're stipulating are in charge of the economy, we won the last election, you're now the prime minister, and other people are premiers, and let's say it was a full sweep, not just federally, but provincially as well. We only have power for who knows how long.
Right.
Or there might be another election, or in 5 years, we have to have another election. Make hay while the sun shines. Namely, if we wait for 10 years or 20 years to gradually get, the next government might come in and reverse things. Who knows? So that's another pragmatic consideration for why we should not sit on our hands, why we should not be lazy about implementing libertarianism. Look, if we like libertarianism, and we're the Libertarian Party, so we got to like libertarianism. You want to implement it as soon as you can. Or take another case. We see a man raping a woman. Do we stop it immediately, or do we let him go on for a little bit? No, we don't let him go on for a little bit. We stop that rape right away. Well, the government is raping people. And it would be misallocative if we stopped the rape right away. The rapist wouldn't like it. He would be, unhappy. Now, the rape victim would certainly like it, but there'll be misallocations anytime you do anything radically. So I think we have to take our courage in our hands, so to speak, and we have to implement libertarianism. Now, look, the very first thing, one possibility is just get rid of everything entirely. Another reason, another way of promoting this is you do it in, a month. And the first thing you don't do is take people off of welfare who are in dire straits. You get rid of the minimum wage first, because the minimum wage law creates unemployment for these people. So what you do is you don't stop welfare, but you stop the reasons for welfare that the government is causing. And then you give it a month or so. So I guess I'm a moderate here. I'm not saying, you do everything right away, but so I guess I'm offering myself a third solution. One is you do everything right away. The other is you take 20 years to do it. And the other is you take 20 days to do it. And I would go for the 20 days. But if I was given a choice between right now everything or 20 years, I would go right now, everything. But in my heart, I would say give it a month, a whole month. And at the end of the month, we have laissez-faire capitalism.
May I challenge a point, Jacques?
Yeah.
So people can collect and develop communes in a libertarian society, but you cannot be a libertarian in a communist society. So when communists are challenged with the question, what would you do with people who resist? Often the answer that they provide is something like, well, they can just move away. They can move to another country that isn't communist, or they can go to some other free market. And I find it interesting, you just said something similar. So I just want to give you the chance to maybe explain further or correct, help me understand the difference here. Because you just said, well, if we eliminate these jobs from the federal government, well, they can get other jobs. Now, some people might hear that and think that sounds like the argument that socialists give. You could just move away. So how would you respond to that, or what would you say to that argument?
Well, I think there's a disanalogy here.
Yeah.
Moving away. Why should we move away? We own land here. Why should we have to go elsewhere? We're the proprietors. Whereas those bureaucrats don't own jobs. So there's a gigantic disanalogy between the one and the other. So I don't think I can have to be corrected for saying that they can get other jobs. Look, right now, the jobs that they're doing is mainly preventing other people from working. All these regulations and all these taxes and stuff like that. We would have a very simplified tax thing, flat tax, and most of the members of the Revenue Canada would be, they're not producing anything. And they could go get jobs as a plumber, as a carpenter, I don't know, as a gardener, as an accountant, whatever. And they would then be producing stuff. Whereas right now, they're not just not producing, they are decreasing our GDP by getting in the way of other people who are trying to earn an honest living. So when I say, if you don't like it here, leave, fair enough, if you don't own it in the first place. But we do own stuff here. We were here before the government, so to speak. I mean, at one time, there was no government, and they had to start a government. Look, when we were cavemen, there were no governments, right? And the government had to start. So we were there first. We own stuff. So to tell us that we have to leave if we don't like semi-socialist Canada, I think is a non-starter. But to tell people who have no ownership rights over their jobs, look, a job is a contract between two people. We speak of my job, but you don't own your job. We speak of my plumber, but you don't own your plumber. We speak of my customer. You don't own your customer. The word "my," possessive word, is sort of misleading. So that would be my answer to that very important point that you made.
Thank you. Yeah, well said. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Walter, would it be fair, if I remember my history correctly, when the servicemen came back from World War II to the U.S., isn't it true that many economists were expecting a terrible outcome, and yet the market absorbed, I don't know how many million of them came back, and then I believe that the economic growth was almost staggering and caught them completely by surprise. I mean, would this not be a good example to show how quickly the market can deal with dislocation?
No, it would not be a good example. It would be an excellent example. I have to correct you. A magnificent example, a perfect case in point. And I kick myself in not having mentioned it, because they brought back not only hands, but mouths too, hands to work and mouths to consume. And the U.S. Economy absorbed these people in, I won't say one fell swoop. It didn't occur one day, but it occurred within a month. So this idea that somehow massive changes can't be accommodated. Another one, my PhD was on rent control. And I was advocating, let's just get rid of rent control, period. Don't phase it out. Here was one of my arguments with Hayek in his Road to Serfdom. He was talking about phasing it out. And people said, well, if you just get rid of rent control, the rents will quadruple or quintuple or something crazy like that. And one answer is, well, look, if you get rid of rent control, you'll have more housing. You have more housing, the prices will fall, or they won't rise as fast as they otherwise would have. But the problem is, to build a house, a high rise, to hold 100 people in it, you don't do that in a month. It takes 2 or 3 years. So what I came up with was, I call it the little old lady effect. What's the little old lady effect? Well, in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, they have these apartments that were rent controlled. They were paying, $20 a month, and they were gigantic. I don't know, 3,000 square feet, something like that. And you had when they first started, you had a mother and a father and 7 kids. And then what happened is that the kids all grew up and left, and the father died. Women usually live 7 years longer than the man. And now you have this single little old lady sitting in this 3,000 square foot or maybe 5,000 square foot apartment, and she's paying $35 a month, and the value of that would be $5,000 a month or something like that. But she has no incentive to leave, because if she left, I mean, she doesn't even use all the rooms. There are, say, 15 rooms, and she only uses 3. What more does she need? And 12 rooms are just shut off, and she doesn't even clean them. She just shuts them off. And now what we do is we get rid of rent control, and guess what? This little old lady has to either bring in boarders, or she has to leave, because now she can get other apartments reasonably, whereas her apartment now is she's paying very little, and she has no incentive to leave. So the point is that you're going to have 12 rooms now coming in on the market instantaneously. Well, I shouldn't say instantaneously, but within a day or two or a week or so. So here is another example of the amelioration effects of the free enterprise system. Just another case in point, where people were afraid that the rents would skyrocket when you got rid of rent control. Well, they're not going to skyrocket, because there are a lot of little old ladies out there, and there'll be a lot of almost instantaneous new residential space available, which would ameliorate this sharp rise.
I believe that very scenario has taken place in Argentina recently. The rent prices are coming down because Javier Milei has either eliminated or significantly reduced the constraint that were existing before. And very drastic, again, impact on rent prices.
I wanted to say that I have to brag, Javier Milei and I are sort of buddies. He mentioned somewhere that there were 4 or 5 people who were his mentors. And he mentioned, I forget, Mises, Rothbard, me, Hoppy, and Huerta de Soto, and Bagus, and I was one of them. And I'm very honored that he thinks of me as a mentor. I think of him as a hero, a magnificent person who is not only making Argentina great again, to borrow some language for Donald, but making the whole world great again, because he is showing a torchlight or a flame of liberty, and he is just utterly magnificent. Now, I got into a little hassle with my ex-friend Hans Hoppe. He and I parted over the Israeli situation, and he was very critical of Javier Milei. He's saying, well, he's been in office almost a year, and we don't have laissez-faire capitalism. I mean, give the man a break. He's only one guy, and it's true, he's got a few other people supporting him in the Congress of Argentina, but he's doing the best he can. And, there's no magic button in Argentina where if he could press it, you'd have laissez-faire capitalism. He's doing the best he can, and I think he's doing magnificently. And I'm disappointed that there are libertarians who are highly critical of him. They say he was pretty good, but he didn't do that. But he got rid of all of rent control, and he's lowering taxes, lowering regulations. In Donald Trump's first term in office, he said, for every new regulation, we're going to get rid of 2 regulations. Now he says, for every new regulation, we're going to get rid of 10. Well, the Malay principle would probably, for every new regulation, get rid of 100. I'm exaggerating with the numbers. I don't know the numbers, but Malay is magnificent. And you're quite right in saying that not only in New York City rent control, but in Argentina, anywhere, because economics is not limited geographically.
I'm doing my part. I buy Argentina wine. They make great wine, and that's what I can do.
One of the things I get to do as leader of the party is I get to participate. There's something called the International Association of Libertarian Parties, and we go on these calls, not quite monthly, but and we get to hear the experience of other libertarians in other countries. And there was someone from Argentina recently who, well, at least from my point of view, educated me in explaining that Malay, there's a lot of stuff he can't do because he's in a minority situation, right? So he can't just use a majority and do everything that he wants to. The other thing that was interesting, and that's kind of a tangent, but he said, don't kid yourself, Argentinians did not vote for him because they're libertarians. They voted for him because they were sick and tired of the misery they had lived under for so many decades. And
if I can interrupt you, speaking of misery, do you know that the average per capita, wealth of Canadians is worse than the poorest state in the U.S.? The poorest state in the U.S.
Please don't remind me of this.
The poorest state in the U.S. is Mississippi.
Yeah.
Canada is poorer than Mississippi.
Yeah.
On average, that's true, but it's not equal across the country. I live in Alberta. Alberta, if a lot of the separatist argument currently is that if Alberta were to separate from Canada, it would instantly be the highest GDP per capita region in North America.
Oh, well, Alberta doesn't count. Alberta is a pretty free enterprise. Thank goodness. What's her name? The premier of...
Danielle Smith.
She's a libertarian. So how bad could Alberta be with a libertarian at the head of it? I'm talking about the average Canadian. Alberta is way higher than the average, and then there are the Atlantic provinces are a bit lower. But on average, Canada is poorer than Mississippi, which is a disgrace. Why? They have internal tariffs. Can you imagine? Hopefully they're getting rid of them now, and they have all this egg marketing board and the milk marketing board and all that stuff. They have a lot of regulations that Mississippi doesn't have. So talking about improving Canada, there's a lot of stuff we could do without being very radical. I wanted to mention one other thing, Jacques. You're the president of the Libertarian Party. I forget the guy's name. He was your predecessor. He was a captain of firemen in Alberta. Do you remember his name?
Tim Bowen.
That's it. He once asked me, what should he do with regard to abortion when people ask him, what's the Libertarian Party's view on abortion? And the situation is that we libertarians don't agree on everything. Abortion is one thing where we don't agree on. Ron Paul is pro-life. Maria Rothbard is pro-choice. You can't get further apart than those two. And we have other disagreements beside abortion, open borders, and I don't know, Israel is another area of contention among libertarians. And my advice to him, and I now give it to you for free if ever you're in this situation, my advice to him was to say, look, we libertarians are divided on this issue. Sue us, we're divided, just as the general population is divided on abortion. So now that I'm on the stage and I'm representing the entire Libertarian Party, I will tell you that we're divided. On the other hand, if you want my view, my personal view, not speaking for the LP, fine. Let's talk about it after this session is over and I'll give you my view. But I think it's fair. It would be unfair for him to give his view, whatever it is. I'm not sure what his view was, as representative of the party when we are divided. I think a much more accurate and truthful way to deal with such questions, say, look, we're divided. and I'll give you my view later or in person or something like that.
Well, our platform on that issue must have been indeed written after he talked to you, because it's pretty much verbatim in terms of starting statement, right? That the Libertarians don't agree on this, and as a result, we don't have a party position. Yeah.
Good. I think that's honest, and we want to be honest, and that's the truth. And there are other issues where we divide, and the leader of the party, whoever it is, should not say, well, my view is this and it represents the LP, because we're divided on that issue. And I think we should just tell the truth.
Right. All right. One final comment, and it's certainly not all that pertinent, simply because we're talking maybe 25 years after the Soviet Union broke. But I was in Tallinn, Estonia, and I'll tell you, those people, and I believe, if I remember correctly, that at some point they had people who were libertarians, who had read the right books and set the country in that direction, because it's a remarkable place to visit in terms. I mean, the free market is thriving, and it's amazing how quickly people without much of a history, right, of being able to draw from, say, people who came before them who were free marketers, figured it out. It was a very nice place to visit. Okay. Topic number 2. Although I'm starting to get a sense of where you're going to go with this. But so in this country, we have supply management. We have supply management for production of milk, cheese, eggs, poultry, and it works with a quota system. So if you want to produce more milk as a farmer, you have to go out and purchase more quotas. So we are opposed to this. In fact, I'll let you know something that's kind of funny, because I don't know if it's the hypocrisy or the lack of consistency. I mean, it's enough to make your head spin around 360 degrees. But there was a ruling not too long ago. They claim to have demonstrated that large grocers had colluded in fixing the price of bread. In fact, just a couple of days in the National Post, an article said that here was a way for you to get some of the $500 million settlement. If at some point you'd purchase some bread, you can try to get. Now, I'm highly dubious of this claim that there was collusion, but let's assume that it was the case. The same people who were horrified that companies would collude like this have, for the most part, have zero problem at all with government-mandated collusion when it comes to dairy and eggs and what have you, right? Because supply management is basically collusion in terms of, well, we're going to only produce so much to keep prices up. Okay, so my question to you, again, let's assume I'm prime minister and I want to do away with this. Is it ethical for me to get rid of it overnight, in spite of the fact that many farmers would have purchased quotas in good faith, right? I mean, to work within the system that was in place at the time. To maybe further or provide a little bit more information, my understanding is that New Zealand, many years ago, had a system very similar to Canada's, did away with it, but I think the government, the taxpayers, ended up purchasing the quotas, or to make the farmers good. So I don't know if that's enough information, but I would love to know if you simply say, well, you guys benefited from a great system at the expense of taxpayers, tough, or you did it in good faith, so we have to do something.
Well, let me turn that into 2 questions. One about collusion itself, and the other about what should we do with the people who in good faith bought quotas. First of all, collusion is a synonym for cooperation. We are now colluding, the 3 of us. We agreed to meet at a certain time and place and discuss certain issues. And if a whole bunch of people decide to charge the higher price for bread or for cars or for chickens or whatever it is, God bless them. Nothing wrong with that. It's sort of similar to an amalgamation or a merger. If all the farmers got together in a merger, now the antitrust people would not look upon this very happily. But we libertarians have a very different view on that. Collusion is just cooperation, and if they make a mistake, and if they keep the price of bread too high under free enterprise, somebody else will seize their market share. There's a whole bunch of history about this, that whenever they try to do any of this stuff, new people came in, especially if there are no tariffs. So this collusion is impotent to hurt the consumer. We shouldn't have any antitrust. Okay, now to the second part of your question. Should we make good for them? Well, from a pragmatic point of view, if you want to stay in power, you should. Why? Because to make good on these farmers will cost everyone, I don't know, in the country $5. I'm just tossing out a number. But for those people, it'll be a lot of money. So they will be very angry at you if you don't give them any money. Whereas everybody chipping in $5, $10, $100, no big deal. But I think it would be improper. Because when you make a deal with the devil, and the government is the devil, you should pay the penalty if the devil, the government, reneges on the agreement. There are no legitimate, from the anarcho-capitalist point of view, there are no legitimate contracts that you can make with the government, because the government is a bunch of thieves. They're the mafia. From a limited government libertarian point of view, you can make contracts with the government, but only with legitimate government functions, armies, courts, police, things like that. So it's illegitimate to give them one dime of taxpayers' money, because you're stealing money from everybody and giving these guys a lot of money. A very similar thing occurred with taxi cabs. In New York City and in many cities, you have to get a medallion or a quota or a right to have a taxi cab, and you pay big bucks. I think at one time you had to pay something like $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million to get a taxi cab medallion. And if we became the mayor of New York City, obviously one of our first things would be to say anyone can drive a taxi. We'll watch out for fraud, but anyone can drive a taxi. And what about somebody who paid $1 million to get the privilege of this cartel? Too bloody bad. You shouldn't have done that. Or if you did it, you should have realized that there's a risk that one day free enterprise will come about. So from a pragmatic point of view, if you want to stay in office and you want to violate libertarian principles, give them something. On the other hand, if you want to stick to libertarian principles, we wish you well. We're not stopping you from having more cows or more chickens, but we're not stopping anyone else starting yesterday.
Yeah.
Can I?
Oh, go ahead, David.
I'd love to ask two questions here, and I wrote them in one order. I'm going to ask them in reverse order. So regarding quotas here, is there an argument to be made that a quota is like property, that the farmer has paid for like a share, that they can then redeem in future? That, like, you're talking about, you're not talking about quotas like property, but part of the argument would be that they're like property. No?
Yes, certainly, but illegitimate property.
And I like that point you made about you cannot make a legitimate contract with a government because they're all crooked. Point taken.
From a limited government perspective, you can make a legitimate contract to be a policeman. If what the policeman is doing is stopping rapes and murders. But if what he's doing is stopping pornography and prostitution, that would be an illegitimate thing.
Or stopping the sale of butter, which is so the government has created a false scarcity. Okay. Now the first question I had written was about this issue of collusion being synonymous with cooperation. Is there an argument to be made about maybe the abuse of monopolistic power that they've accumulated in the current system, which is protectionist, or an argument to be made about transparency, like that they're colluding, they're making these deals not in the free market, so to speak, but behind closed doors and with the protectionist policies that are already in place? and therefore it's bad.
Let's talk about monopoly a little bit. There are
Sure.
two different versions of monopoly. One totally legitimate, the other idiotic.
Yeah. Okay.
What's the legitimate definition of monopoly? It started, the King of England gave you a monopoly because you fought the good battle against the French. And you now have the monopoly of candles in London. And other people can make candles in London, but they have to go to you and pay you for that privilege. And if they don't pay you and they start making candles, you put them in jail. That is a legitimate understanding what monopoly is. And it really shouldn't be called monopoly because monopoly is a single seller. So forget about that for a second. The legitimate function of a legitimate definition of a monopoly is a coercive activity where you have the monopoly of candle making in London. And if I make candles, I go to jail unless I get your permission, for which I have to pay. Fine. But now there's this other definition of monopoly. At one time, IBM was the only producer of computers. Why was IBM the only producer of computers? Well, because nobody else was making computers. Did IBM go to Bill Gates's garage and say, you better stop or we're going to kick your butt? No, they didn't do anything like that.
I believe they did try, but that's beside the point. Sorry,
Well,
carry on.
Well, if they did, then they're guilty. I don't think so. I don't want to dispute the facts, but if they did, then they're not kosher. But for many, I don't think they did because Bill Gates was 12 years old or wasn't even born when IBM started.
My history, it might be Xerox that tried to lay claim to some of the design of Windows or something. But never mind that. That's in the past and unrelated to your point.
Look, if they wanted to buy something, they're capable of buying stuff. My son used to work for Microsoft, and now he has his own little computer company. And if Xerox or IBM or Microsoft wants to buy him out, God bless. But take IBM. Mm-hmm. IBM was the only producer of computers. Why? Because nobody else was producing computers. They were a monopoly in the sense of monopoly, namely they were the single seller of computers. Perfectly virtuous. And yet what the government did in the US is they had a 20-year lawsuit against them for monopolizing. Well, they were monopolizing in the sense of single seller. Look, suppose that tomorrow Burger King and Wendy's and all these other burger places poison people and they're out of business, and now only McDonald's is a seller of burgers. Well, they're not they're a monopoly in the good sense. They're the only seller of burgers. Fine. But if we have a rule that somehow that we have to put everybody else out of business in the monopoly in the sense of the candle selling, that would be very bad. So with regard to price collusion, it's just a sort of a merger. And now, if you have more of a certain percentage of the market, the antitrust people will come kick your butt. But how do they know what the proper concatenation of businesses in the country is? They don't know. So I think the proper libertarian view would be we get rid of all antitrust. We keep laws against fraud, for goodness sakes, but there's no antitrust, and then people can cooperate and either collude or cooperate on setting prices, which is a sort of a partial merger, or they can all get together in one company, and if they do and they screw up, other independent people, especially from other countries, will come and undermine them. And that was the experience of many trusts when they had the trust busting in the 19th century in the US. So my answer is to the two-part question. One, nothing wrong with colluding, price colluding, or saying you have this territory, you have that geographical territory. Any collusion is fine. It's just cooperation, and mergers are a form of that. And also, with regard to these quotas or the taxi medallions, not a penny for them.
All right. Well, I asked the same question of a professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge, who's also a libertarian, and he gave me exactly the same answer. So, whereas I was of two minds, I have been convinced. So, yeah, if we take power, it's gone, and it's gone without compensation. Okay.
On that topic, let me add that we recently had a great conversation about supply management in Canada. Check it out on the YouTube channel. It's Jack and I and our guest went into great depth on the topic.
Well, that's one of the reasons Canada is so poor. They have internal tariffs. They have this marketing board crap. If they get rid of that, Canada can be, first of all, richer than Mississippi on average, and then moving on up.
On a related question, do you see like the act of the CRTC in Canada is similar to supply management? Do you see them as the same structure fundamentally?
Absolutely. I mean, we have the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. That is heinous. Yeah. The whole point of the fourth estate. What are the three estates? The executive, the legislative, and the courts. Those are the three estates. The fourth estate is the media.
Yeah, the press.
The press, whether it's electronic on CBC or written, it doesn't matter. And the whole point of the press is to look askance at the other three, to report on them and to show the flaws or whatever and make them better. It's only in the commie countries that the government has a TV station. This is an abomination. Maybe one of the first things we should do when we take power, which is imminent, we're on our way, is get rid of the CBC, not get rid of the CBC, privatize the CBC. And while we're on the subject of privatization, that there used to be, what was it, Petrocan, another abomination. I mean, what the hell was the government doing delivering gasoline? I had a full head of hair. Look at me now. I've been pulling it out over Canada. That's why we're so poor, because there's too much government intervention. And when the Libertarian Party gets in, and as I say, we're on the verge, we're going to make Canada rich. We're going to make Canada great again, to follow a little bit of our man Donald.
Now, on that one, Walter, say that's going back to 2015, again, when I ran for the first time. I used to say to people that I thought there was a race between us libertarians convincing people that we had the best solution and a crisis happening. I no longer hold that view. I am absolutely convinced that we're going to have a crisis well before we can convince people, not unlike what has happened to Argentina. I mean, to my point earlier, that people are not necessarily libertarians, but they were so sick and tired of abysmal living condition that, hey, we got to try something else. I'm not very, no, I should say, I'm not optimistic at all about the future. I certainly in this country, I see the government growing every single year. I point out to people that back in 1965, 33% of the average household income got paid out in taxes. And here I'm talking all in, right? Not just the income tax, but sales tax and land transfer tax and all that stuff. It is now 45%, right? So it's like a cancer. It's growing a little bit every year. And at some point, we're going to get to a point where it will no longer be sustainable. And that might be our chance as libertarians, is to finally come out and say, well, first of all, we've told you so. And number two, don't start going back to communism or things of that nature. Now, even that one, and again, I think you'll be quite familiar with this, recall that the financial crisis of 2008, many people in Congress, it's like, what has happened here? I mean, we need to get some people who know to tell us what's happened and why or how we can avoid it in the future. But note that they didn't call out, I mean, for example, Mark Thornton had predicted it almost to a T, Peter Schiff, maybe you, I forget, but many Austrians had repeatedly pointed out that the whole thing was just an accident waiting to happen. And of course, none of them, like the only people who got invited by Congress, to testify were the people who got caught with their pants down. And that's the part that frightens me, is that even if we go to a crisis, are we actually going to go to people who have been warning about this, or are they going to simply recycle the old people? Do you have a comment about that, or a view?
I do, and I think you're absolutely right. We were speaking about Argentina, which has got resources up to its neck. We've got Canada, which has got resources up to our armpits. We've got Venezuela, which is sitting on a mountain. Well, I shouldn't say a mountain of oil, a pool of oil that is just amazing. And yet they're relatively poor. Whereas you got Hong Kong, which is just a bare rock. You got Japan, which doesn't have one resource to rub against another resource, and they're relatively wealthy. So it couldn't be resources. It's got to be economic policy, and people just don't see this. Now, one of the best articles I've ever written is why they're so few libertarians. Why is it that when they ask people to testify for Congress, they never ask us? They ask the usual the usual suspects, and it's not a very positive prognostication for our future. What I say is sociobiology. What's sociobiology? Sociobiology is a theory that we are the way we are now, based on what it took a million years ago when we were in the caves or in the trees to leave progeny. Well, what size groups did we live in when we were in the caves or the trees a million years ago, or I don't know how long ago? I'm not a biologist or a historian. There were groups of 20 people, maybe 30. And they were our aunts and our uncles and our cousins, and that was it. We saw a caveman from a different cave. We tried to kill him because he was going to kill us. There was no such thing as trade. We are not biologically grounded in openness to trade. Why? Because there was no benefit of having the gene for trade in terms of leaving progeny. Why is it that men have a better sense of direction than women? Because the caveman had to go 20 miles away to get a deer. And if he couldn't find his way back to the cave, he didn't leave much progeny. Why are women much better at meticulous things? When I go to the refrigerator, I can't find anything. My wife points it out and says, you're a dummy. You can't find anything in this stupid refrigerator. Why? Because women stuck close to the cave and they went berry picking or whatever. And if they couldn't tell the difference between a poisonous and a non-poisonous berry, they didn't leave much future generation. So we are not biologically capable of appreciating free trade. We're open to tariffs, for goodness sakes. Tariffs are very popular, and tariffs are an abomination. One of my favorite economists is a guy named Thomas Sowell, and what he said was that it's beneath contempt for any intellectual to favor tariffs. And I think that's right on. Okay, so that was the first third of this essay. That the reason we don't have any liberty is because we're not biologically open to trade. The second part, the second co-author wrote, but we've gone to Europe and we find that there are 10,000 pots and the size of the tribe was only 200. And over here, there were 10,000 fishing poles or whatever it was. And over here, there were 10,000 something else's. And from this, we deduce that we are open to trade. And the third section of this paper was, yes, we're open to trade, but it's only 10,000 years ago. Whereas we're not open to trade a million years ago, and the million years ago is more powerful than the 10,000 years ago, so we're sort of ambivalent. So the way I see libertarianism is sort of like pushing the rock up Sisyphus, and then the rock comes down, and we keep pushing it. And I think that there's a good chance in about 500,000 years when we'll all be libertarians if we don't blow ourselves up first. But meantime, I think that the reason Ron Paul got, or the Libertarian Party, what do we get? 0.5% of the vote, 2%, and we're very happy. I think the reason is because we are not biologically suited for libertarianism. So why then do it? Well, one is so much fun. Tweaking noses, I mean, it's the most wonderful thing you can think of, to show that these idiots about East Germany and West Germany and North Korea and South Korea and all the stuff we've been talking about. So one reason it's a lot of fun. Another is we feel compelled to promote liberty. Once you get that bug, you're an addict.
Sorry about the dog.
That's okay. He was supporting me. I read into his bark that he supported this. So I think that the medium run prognostication is more of the same. For the next 10,000 years, we're going to get 2% of the vote or 1%. And every time we get 3%, we're going to be deliriously happy. But we're going to do it anyway because it's the most wonderful thing. It's better than Mozart. It's better than Bach. It's better than Handel. It's just the most magnificent thing to promote liberty. And as I say, we're addicts and we're going to do it anyway. And it's a lot of fun.
Let me, while on this topic, I read a book a couple of years ago called Collective Delusion, I believe. And to your point, it's interesting because I am convinced that the world is changing much, much faster. In fact, light years faster than our ability to adapt. The book makes the case that we are actually wired to conform, which often explains why the vast majority of people would prefer to be wrong with the crowd than to be right on their own, because it's very much against human nature to behave that way. And apparently, from an evolutionary point of view, there was an advantage to this because let's say that you're traveling, you are part of a hunter-gatherer group. You, Walter, happen to be smarter than the rest of them. You can read the signs of nature better than the rest of them. You get to a fork in the road. The group decides that the next cache of food is left. You're saying, no, it's right. You were actually back then better off to go with the group because they provided you with protection against predators in case of an injury. They were there to help you, as opposed to actually going right on your own because, yes, maybe you'd get more food, but you'd be on your own, right? It's a shame in a way that we don't evolve quickly because there's no advantage these days to that type of thinking. Like this idea that, yeah, I would rather be wrong with the majority than to be right on my own. There's no longer any evolutionary advantages to this. But the gene is still there, apparently. So that's a problem.
I promised you guys an hour. We've been at it about an hour. We have much more to discuss. I propose we meet again in a month or so and continue this lovely conversation. But I have another appointment that I've got to get off for now. But thanks for inviting me.
It's been great to talk with you, Walter, and I'm honored to have been able to join the conversation.
Yes, thank you, Walter. And yes, we will do it again.
Great. Take care, guys.
All right.
Bye, Walter.
Bye.
So for everyone else tuning in, thanks for signing up and subscribing and liking and sharing and tickling that algorithm. And we just had a nice conversation with Walter. We were at X, YouTube, Facebook, maybe Rumble. I'm going to have to check into that. And we had some interesting chat messages, some folks that were, commiserating at the platforms. So Jacques, do you want to debrief or do you need to get going?
No, we could debrief a little bit.
I thought it was just a really great conversation and nice to talk with Walter.
No, it was wonderful. I mean, he's one of the luminaries of the libertarian Austrian movement, and again, the fact that he reached out to us, to the point I made about him apparently granting co-authorship to his students, I think is a generous spirit. I mean, I'm not quite sure how he came to find us in the first place, or the fact that Libertarian Lens exists, but I hope it's going to help our cause.
Yeah. How about, speaking of our cause, the party would like to ask for some help. So there's about 112 people currently watching, and there might be a few hundred that eventually watch this live stream over the next weeks, months. The party would like some help. We're coming up to a triennial sort of confirmation process with the Elections Canada, and we need to get some help from our members. Jacques, can you briefly describe that and maybe just a call for proposals, submissions?
Yeah, so every 3 years, Elections Canada requires the signatures of 250 members of the party in order to remain registered. If we and we have to do this by the end of the month, right? So time is running out. If we don't do this, we are going to get deregistered, and then we can't run into elections. And the Liberals got defeated in the House of Commons just a couple of days ago. I don't know if it's a sign that it may be a very short-lived government, but it would be a shame if we couldn't run again. So with that, a letter is going to go out to every member, again, pointing out the urgency of the situation, telling you the steps to take. My challenge to members is, if every single one of us can sign up or encourage one person to join the party and to sign, we are going to get this done in no time at all. A
There's
single person.
There's a
So
QR code, by the way. I just posted it here. There's a QR code over there. That will take you directly to the form, right? So you grab that form from the government's website. That's the QR code. Fill out the sections A and B. Print the form and just take a picture of it. Sign it, because you have to sign it with ink. Take a picture, send it to us at membership@libertarian.ca. That would really help out the party.
yeah.
Well, I have a new barbecue to go and enjoy. So I'm going to say goodnight. Jacques, it's good to see you.
Likewise. Go Oilers. Even though
Go
you're in
Oilers.
Calgary? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm an Oilers fan. When I was, I guess, early teens, that's through the 80s, well, becoming a teenager, and then that was at the pinnacle of the Oilers era, right? The greatest era of the Edmonton Oilers, Gretzky and all the other greats. And so I've kind of always been a fan. I must say, even though I now live very well just on the edge of Calgary, I don't feel as much enthusiasm about the Flames. So for the Calgarians watching, sorry, I'm not going to apologize. Maybe it'll grow on me. Yeah.
All right.
Well, good night.
Let's see if we can do a Libertarian Currents in the near future.
Yeah, that would be great. There's lots to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.